5 o'clock in the evening, he saw the Germans bringing out all the young and middle-aged men from the cells and ranging their prisoners to the number of 40 in 3 rows in the middle of the courtyard. About 20 Germans were drawn up opposite, but before anything was done, there was a tremendous fusillade from some point near the prison, and the civilians were hurried back to their cells. Half an hour later, the same 40 men were brought back into the courtyard. Almost immediately, there was a second fusillade, and they were driven back to the cells again. About 7 o'clock, the witness and other prisoners were brought out of their cells and marched out of the prison. They went between 2 lines of troops to Roche Bayard, about a kilometer away. An hour later, the women and children were separated, and the prisoners were brought back to Dinant, passing the prison on their way. Just outside the prison, the witness saw 3 lines of bodies which he recognized as being those of his neighbors. They were nearly all dead, but he noticed movement in some of them. There were about 120 bodies. The prisoners were then taken up to the top of a hill outside Dinant and compelled to stay there till 8 o'clock in the morning. On the following day, they were put into cattle trucks and taken thence to Koblenz. For 3 months, they remained prisoners in Germany. Unarmed civilians were killed in masses at other places near the prison. About 90 bodies were seen lying on top of one another in a grass square opposite the convent. A witness asked a German officer why her husband had been shot, and he told her that it was because 2 of her sons had been in the civil guard and had shot at the Germans. As a matter of fact, one of her sons was at that time in Liège and the other in Brussels. It is stated that besides the 90 corpses referred to above, 60 corpses of civilians were recovered from a hole in the brewery yard, and that 48 bodies of women and children were found in a garden. The town was systematically set on fire by hand grenades. Another witness saw a little girl of 7, one of whose legs was broken, and the other injured by a bayonet. We have no reason to believe that the civilian population of Dinant gave any provocation, or that any other defense can be put forward to justify the treatment inflicted upon its citizens. The Bryce Commission reports the outrages in a number of Belgian villages in this terse fashion. In Hoofdstad, a number of houses had been set on fire, and many corpses were seen, some in houses, some in backyards, and some in the streets. 2 witnesses speak of having seen the body of a young man pierced by bayonet thrusts, with the wrists cut also. On a side road, corpse of a civilian was seen on his doorstep with a bayonet wound in his stomach, and by his side the dead body of a boy of 5 or 6, with his hands nearly severed. The corpse of a woman and boy were seen at the blacksmith's. They had been killed with the bayonet. In a cafe, a young man, also killed with the bayonet, was holding his hands together as if in the attitude of supplication. In the garden of a house in the main street, bodies of 2 women were observed, and in another house the body of a boy of 16 with 2 bayonet wounds in the chest. In Semst, a similar condition of affairs existed. Houses were burning, and in some of them were the charred remains of civilians. In a bicycle shop, a witness saw the burned corpse of a man. Other witnesses speak of this incident. Another civilian, unarmed, was shot as he was running away. As will be remembered, all the arms had been given up some time before by the order of the burgomaster. At Weird, 4 corpses of civilians were lying in the road. It was said these men had fired upon the German soldiers, but this is denied. The arms had been given up long before. 2 children were killed in the village of Weird, quite wantonly, as they were standing in the road with their mother. They were 3 or 4 years old and were killed with the bayonet. A small barn burning close by formed a convenient means of getting rid of bodies. They were thrown into the flames from the bayonets. It is right to add that no commissioned officer was present at the time. At Eppingham, on August 25th, a pregnant woman who had been wounded with a bayonet was discovered in the convent. She was dying. On the road, 6 dead bodies of laborers were seen. At Boortmeerbeek, a German soldier was seen to fire 3 times at a little girl 5 years old. Having failed to hit her, he subsequently bayoneted her. He was killed with the butt end of a rifle by a Belgian soldier who had seen him commit this murder from a distance. At Herent, the charred body of a civilian was found in a butcher's shop, and in a handcart 20 yards away, the dead body of a laborer. 2 eyewitnesses relate that a German soldier shot a civilian and stabbed him with the bayonet. He then made one of these witnesses, a civilian prisoner, smell the blood on the bayonet. At Hocht, the bodies of 10 civilians were seen lying in a row by a brewery wall. In a laborer's house which had been broken up, the mutilated corpse of a woman of 30 to 35 was discovered. Concerning the treatment of women and children in general, the report continues, the evidence shows that the German authorities, when carrying out a policy of systematic arson and plunder in selected districts, usually drew some distinction between the adult male population on the one hand and the women and children on the other. It was a frequent practice to set apart the adult males of the condemned district with a view to the execution of a suitable number, preferably of the younger and more vigorous, and to reserve the women and children for milder treatment. The depositions, however, present many instances of calculated cruelty, often going the length of murder towards the women and children of the condemned area. At Dinant, 60 women and children were confined in the cellar of a convent from Sunday morning till the following Friday, August 28th, sleeping on the ground, for there were no beds, with nothing to drink during the whole period, and given no food until Wednesday, when somebody threw into the cellar 2 sticks of macaroni and a carrot for each prisoner. In other cases, the women and children were marched for long distances along roads, as for instance the march of the women from Louvain to Tirlemont, August 28th, the laggards pricked on by the attendant Uhlans. A lady complains of having been brutally kicked by privates. Others were struck at with the butt end of rifles. At Louvain, at Liège, at Archet, at Malines, at Montigny, at Andenne, and elsewhere, there is evidence that the troops were not restrained from drunkenness, and drunken soldiers cannot be trusted to observe the rules or decencies of war, least of all when they are called upon to execute a preordained plan of arson and plunder. From the very first, women were not safe. At Liège, women and children were chased about the streets by soldiers. Witnesses recount how a great crowd of men, women, and children from Archet were marched to Louvain and then suddenly exposed to a fire from a mitrailleuse and rifles. We are all placed in Station Street, Louvain,
I saw the corpses
and the German
of some women
soldiers
in the
fired
street.
on us,
I fell
recounts a
down,
sufferer.
and a woman who had been shot fell on top of me. Women and children suddenly turned out into the streets and, compelled to witness the destruction of their homes by fire, provided a sad spectacle to such as were sober enough to see. A humane German officer, witnessing the ruin of Erschot, exclaimed in disgust, "I am a father myself, and I cannot bear this. It is not war, but butchery." Officers as well as men succumbed to the temptation of drink, with results which may be illustrated by an incident which occurred at Kampenhout. In this village there was a certain well-to-do merchant, name given, who had a cellar of good champagne. On the afternoon of the 14th or 15th of August, 3 German cavalry officers entered the house and demanded champagne. Having drunk 10 bottles and invited 5 or 6 officers and 3 or 4 private soldiers to join them, they continued their carouse and then called for the master and mistress of the house. Quote, "Immediately my mistress came in," says the valet de chambre. "One of the officers who was sitting on the floor got up and, putting a revolver to my mistress's temple, shot her dead. The officer was obviously drunk. The other officers continued to drink and sing, and they did not pay any great attention to the killing of my mistress. The officer who shot my mistress then told my master to dig a grave and bury my mistress in it. My master and the officer went into the garden, the officer threatening my master with a pistol. My master was then forced to dig the grave and to bury my mistress in it. I cannot say for what reason they killed my mistress. The officer who did it was singing all the time." Quote, end quote. In the evidence before us, there are cases tending to show that aggravated crimes against women were sometimes severely punished. One witness reports that a young girl who was being pursued by a drunken soldier in Louvain appealed to a German officer, and that the offender was then and there shot. Another describes how an officer of the 32nd Regiment of the Line was led out to execution for the violation of two young girls, but reprieved at the request or with the consent of the girl's mother. These instances are sufficient to show that the maltreatment of women was no part of the military scheme of the invaders, however much it may have appeared to be the inevitable result of the system of terror deliberately adopted in certain regions. Indeed, so much is avowed. "I asked the commander why we had been spared," says a lady in Louvain, who deposes to having suffered much brutal treatment during the sack. "He said, 'We will not hurt you any more. Stay in Louvain. All is finished.' It was Saturday, August 29th, and the reign of terror was over." End quote. The Germans used men, women, and children of Belgium as screens for advancing infantry, as is shown in the following. Outside Fort Fleron near Liège, men and children were marched in front of the Germans to prevent the Belgian soldiers from firing. The progress of the Germans through Mons was marked by many incidents of this character. Thus, on August 22nd, half a dozen Belgian colliers returning from work were marching in front of some German troops who were pursuing the English, and in the opinion of the witnesses, they must have been placed there intentionally. An English officer describes how he caused a barricade to be erected in a main thoroughfare leading out of Mons, when the Germans, in order to reach a crossroad in the rear, fetched civilians out of the houses on each side of the main road and compelled them to hold up white flags and act as cover. Another English officer who saw this incident is convinced that the Germans were acting deliberately for the purpose of protecting themselves from the fire of the British troops. Apart from this protection, the Germans could not have advanced, as the street was straight and commanded by the British rifle fire at a range of 700 or 800 yards. Several British soldiers also speak of this incident, and their story is confirmed by a Flemish witness in a side street. The French government also appointed a commission, headed by Monsieur Georges Pael. This body made an investigation of outrages committed by German officers and soldiers in northern France. Its report showed conditions that outstripped in horror the war tactics of savages. It makes the following accusations. Quote, "In Rebais, 2 English cavalrymen who were surprised and wounded in this commune were finished off with gunshots by the Germans when they were dismounted and when one of them had thrown up his hands, showing thus that he was unarmed." End quote. In the department of the Marne, as everywhere else, the German troops gave themselves up to general pillage, which was carried out always under similar conditions and with the complicity of their leaders. The communes of Hilts-le-Maract, Suippes, Marfox, Fromentieres, and Esternay suffered especially in this way. Everything that the invader could carry off from the houses was placed on motor lorries and vehicles. At Suippes in particular, they carried off in this way a quantity of different objects, among these sewing machines and toys. A great many villages as well as important country towns were burned without any reason whatsoever. Without doubt, these crimes were committed by order, as German detachments arrived in the neighborhood with their torches, their grenades, and their usual outfit for arson. In Marfox, 19 private houses were burned. Of the commune of Glan, practically nothing remains. In Somme-Torbe, the entire village has been destroyed, with the exception of the mairie, the church, and 2 private buildings. In Auve, nearly all the town has been destroyed. In Étrépy, 63 families out of 70 are homeless. In Huron, all of the houses, with the exception of 5, have been burned. In Sermailles-les-Bains, only 40 houses out of 900 remain. In Bignacourt-sur-Sault, 30 houses out of 33 are in ruins. In Suippes, the big market town which has practically been burned out, German soldiers carrying straw and cans of petrol have been seen in the streets. While the mayor's house was burning, 6 sentinels with fixed bayonets were under orders to forbid anyone to approach and prevent any help being given. End quote. All this destruction by arson, which only represents a small proportion of the acts of the same kind in the department of the Seine and Marne, was accomplished without the least tendency to rebellion or the smallest act of resistance being recorded against the inhabitants of the localities which are today more or less completely destroyed. Indeed, so much is avowed. In some villages, the Germans, before setting fire to them, made one of their soldiers fire a shot from his rifle so as to be able to pretend afterward that the civilian population had attacked them, an allegation which is all the more absurd since at the time when the enemy arrived, the only inhabitants left were old people, sick persons, or people absolutely without any means of aggression." End quote.